Hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to Successful Perspectives. Successful Perspectives, of course, is when we deep dive into the topic of leadership. And most importantly, we get to know one of our members from our very selective and influential network, Boardroom by EMIR. And I am delighted to be joined for this episode by my dear friend and someone who I admire a great deal. Sarah Brook, who is the CEO and founder of the Sparkle Foundation, which is an incredible charity that helps some of the most disadvantaged children in Malawi. And she has become a role model to many charities around the world in terms of how her model actually works. So, Sarah, it is wonderful to have you on Successful Perspectives, and you're very welcome, and thank you for making the time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You literally wowed our audience of, we had about 200 CEOs and government officials at our Q4 session of Boardroom. And genuinely, and you will have seen this from the response you've gotten from the other CEOs in our network, everyone was incredibly engaged with your story. So I think that's a good place to start. Why don't you give all of our viewers and our members in the network a sense of how you came to be the founder of the Sparkle Foundation, because it is an incredible story.
Okay, so I'll try and summarize as best possible because obviously it's been quite a journey, but the why is often the best place to start with this. So that was quite literally me, 18 years old, closing my eyes, pointing at a map and my finger landing on Malawi. I didn't know at the time where Malawi was. I just kind of told my parents I'm off to volunteer in Malawi, which I later revealed was Africa.
And that Sarah was because if I remember correctly, your grandfather had left you some money or something, and you felt, okay, I'm going to have an adventure with this, right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, for most people at 18, it was like go to university, go on a gap year. And for me, it just always been this burning desire that I wanted to learn about other people and backgrounds. I still don't know why that is, but my parents just said since I was a child, I've always been fascinated. So I jumped on that opportunity and off I went for 3 months to volunteer. And quite literally, as my personality suggests, throwing myself in at the deep end, straight into someone's house in a village who couldn't speak a word of English. She was kindly giving me their local food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in true British fashion, too polite to say, this is not agreeing with me, I just kept eating it. And after 6 weeks, it went from bad to worse. And then I ended up unconscious, rushed to the local hospital with a twist in my bowel. And unfortunately, there, my friend was told they need to operate, but there was a 96% chance of HIV. No sterile
because
equipment.
you were unconscious at this stage, right? So your friend had to make these decisions, right?
I mean, I'm none the wiser, so I was extremely grateful to be unconscious at this point. I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, there was no phones back then. I mean, not that I was that old, but there certainly was no signal or things like that. So yeah, he was said, operate. And the doctor openly said, I've never done this surgery before, but I can give it a go. Also, our equipment, we've not had the latest donation from the US, so not sure how sterile things are. We've got a high rate of HIV, so she might contract that, but she will survive. And he was like, well, looking at both those options, what's the other choice? And he said, go to a private hospital 2 hours away, but she'll probably die before she gets there. So he made that choice. I think, interestingly enough, I think he was quite traumatized by the experience. He's never been back to Malawi since, but he made that choice of go to the private hospital, one I'm extremely grateful for today. I went, I had the surgery, spent 3.5 weeks there, and he came to visit. And I think he said to me, Sarah, when we were at the local hospital, there were 300 people waiting in a queue to see the one doctor. And when they saw you, ultimately, because you're white, they said that you were a priority and you should be seen first. And you were the doctor for 2.5 hours. And when you came out, some of the people in the queue who were children had died. And it was just like, wow, that moment honestly changed my life forever. And I was like, that's it. I've got to do something to help. I've got to make a difference to at least one child's life.
So you have this epiphany and you decide that you have to contribute. So how do you go about doing that? What's the next step then?
I mean, I'd I'd love to say there was a nice sort of step-by-step process, well thought out plan. I was just like, I've got to raise money and I've got to do something about it. So I went to university, did what I could to run different events, raised as much as I could, and I traveled with about $30,000 to Malawi when I was 21. Got speaking to some locals, identified a place, built a small school, and then walked away at 21 thinking, oh, I've done my bit to help now. I've made a difference to, at the time, it was 50 children, 8 volunteers. And off I went, trained to be a journalist working at the BBC. So I thought, I've done that. And then it was only when I went back a year later that I realised actually I'd gone about it in the complete wrong way. There was a real approach needed for the charity sector, and I needed to learn best practice. So that's what led me then to volunteer at all these organisations around the world, understand how the charity sector works, and develop a model that I thought actually needed to change. You know, we were working on a very old school charity model that was donor dependent. We're putting money down a bottomless pit, and actually I was hearing too many times Africa need to be saved, and it's just absolute nonsense. We need to learn so much from the continent, and you can't put all of Africa together in one big bunch. Every country is unique in its own way. So from that moment, I was just determined that we'd create a charity that was different, and we'd model ourselves on a business. And actually, albeit the end result for businesses is profit, for us, our impact was changing lives, but our core fundamentals and how we operate would be done just like a business. And I think that's led to the success where we are today.
And you mentioned the word lives there, but you have several lives. You seem to be like James Bond in that sense, because maybe you can go down the rabbit hole of the story in terms of how this impacts your life and some of the situations you found yourself in then after that.
Yes, I mean, obviously, I moved to Dubai for the tax-free salary to fund Sparkle, and I did that for 2.5 years. And having gone from living in a very nice apartment to having everything I could have ever wished for at age 23, I wasn't fulfilled. I didn't feel that sense of purpose. And Sparkle was growing as a charity on the ground in Malawi. And that's when I sort of made the decision I wanted to move full time and be on the ground. And it was there really that things took a slightly, I don't want to say turn for the worse because they were the best moments of my life, but from a health perspective, I mean, a cat with 9 lives, probably, I think I'm on my 7th now, from anaphylactic shock. I've been brought back to life 5 times. I've been in an induced coma from a head injury. I've been held at knife point. I've been chased around a village with a machete. I've been to prison with 23 other women, wrongfully arrested. I mean, the list, honestly, Trevor, is endless. My poor parents, my dad is now white as a result, but yeah, it's been a journey, and certainly my health has kind of malaria, typhoid, dengue fever, every tropical disease under the sun, tried and tested. COVID was a breeze. Yeah.
And even one of these was when you were going for some R&R to try and recoup, you were sitting under a coconut tree, right?
Yeah, sunbathing, relaxing, looking out. I mean, jokes aside, my dad said, oh, have you done a risk assessment? And I said, oh, very funny. What could possibly go wrong when your parents take you away to a lovely holiday? And oh, lo and behold, a coconut falls from a tree and knocks me straight out in the head. No one else. Could have been any other coconut, any other person. There were people I mean, you couldn't write it if you tried. I then later proceeded to get off a bus and just looking, and then a car took me out. So I mean, I'm just one of those people. People don't tend to want to walk near me because I'm a walking risk. But you know, the saying, "What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger." So.
And what about your experience in prison? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's one that I don't have to talk about. It's really difficult, to be honest. A 5-year-old and a 3-year-old that we were looking after at Sparkle were raped. 1 in 3 women are abused or raped in Malawi. So it's quite a hard story, and I wanted justice. So I took the girls to hospital, and we found out it was the stepfather that was the perpetrator. And so they said, go to the police. We went to the police, and unfortunately, Malawi said they're under the age of 12. They can't give evidence in court. We have to call the parents. It's like, but the parents are the ones that, no, we have to. And I honestly thought that was the worst night of my life, having to hand these girls back. But actually, the night after that then proceeded because I was arrested for child trafficking because I'd taken the children without consent from the parents. And yeah, I got put into a cell with 23 other women who had murdered their husbands with machetes. My phone was taken from me. There was a toilet, which was a hole in the ground, no windows, no nothing, and no one told me what was going on. Apparently they called my dad for ransom. I think they asked for $1 million US. My dad originally thought it was a joke, then quite kind of later realised it was not and said no, called the British Embassy. And then, yeah, I was released and apology was given to me. And I think it just taught me so much that, you know, I forever take it for granted how protected we are. You know, obviously UAE even been voted as one of the safest places to live in the world, and even for me back home in the UK as well. So it just really brought it home. And these women, I suppose I used it as in with my journalist background to ask the stories of how it ended up that these ladies ended up killing their husbands with machetes, and it was just years and years of abuse, and they'd reached a point of no return. And not that I warrant for any moment that's the right action to take, but when you're not protected by a system, how much can one individual honestly take?
So despite all of these events, you continue to pursue Sparkle and it continues to grow. And as a model, it starts to attract more attention, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we learn from failing. So we started very much as education, and we see everywhere, you know, the charity sector is the second most profitable business in the world, even though it's a not-for-profit sector. So there's so much political drive that goes into these things, and some of the biggest deals in the world. And everyone says education is key. I 100% agree with that. But you only need to look at certain foundations distributing malaria nets, and yet the malaria nets are used as fishing nets or are used as bed linen. So yes, education is the right way forward, but there's many other things that need to be done. So for us, that's how our model developed, that it wasn't just one dimensional. And we came up with this holistic approach, which incorporated education, medical, community, and nutrition. And once we'd got all of those sort of 4 pillars in, we then covered 10 programs. I mean, we align with 9 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And for us, it is very much about working with communities, and those being the driving force and following the need rather than the money. And this model has we spent the last 5 years, truthfully, getting as much information, collecting data, speaking to the people, working out what works, what doesn't work. And then just 2020, pre-COVID, it was like this light bulb moment that everything had come together, and we finally got a model that people started to recognize. We were getting from all over the world, people wanting to be involved. It's like, okay, we're ready to now replicate, and that's where we are today. COVID actually proved massively successful for us.
And you said there, you know, follow the need rather than the money, right? What does that look like in terms of, you know, if you're providing education, is it also making sure that the kids have other aspects of their lives looked after in order for the education to be effective? Or what does the model look like?
Yeah, exactly. For us, the model is very much about, you know, education is at the root of it, but there's no point educating a child if they're hungry. So that's where we brought in a feeding program. Equally, we can't just keep feeding and feeding children. So we need to look at sustainability. And that's when it was farming. Okay, let's work on a farm that we can grow our food, so then it covers our costs. Okay, then it was, we were feeding our children, we were educating our children, but unfortunately their health was causing them distress, so they couldn't learn. So then we brought in a medical program. Again, looking at medical programs, treating medical issues and diseases was the easy part, but the preventative was, if you'd want to change the statistics of a country, you need to work on the education, the awareness. So that's when we opened a clinic, and then we started doing community outreach programs. And then we realized we're not a specialist in everything, so we need to do partnerships. So we worked with charities that are specialists, from cleft palate to eyesight to deafness. We brought in a whole mix of professionals that could then offer their services under our umbrella. And then the final part of the jigsaw was, if the parents didn't value the education, what was the point in all of this? They often have dropped out of school, they've not even made it to secondary education. So actually teaching them and giving them the opportunity. So that's when we started doing community programs. And then the final part is that every parent around the world, no matter what, has the same desire for the best for their children. And so we realized that actually if these parents had the money, they could then fund their children, and that's where their money would be spent. So we then looked at empowering them with businesses, startup, microfinance, and then all four of those jigsaw sort of pieces fit together. And it was actually the final part came from when I had my head injury. I ended up not being able to work for the charity for almost a year because I was having to learn to walk, talk, everything else again. And we then realised that I was the bottleneck of this charity, and actually we couldn't continue just to rely on international support. So we looked at how we could generate income in country, how we could partner with other organisations, and how we could create a business model, which then ended up becoming the Sparkle model, which is in effect a franchise model that now people, other charities around the world can come to us, we can train them, we can teach them, and then they can go off and deliver the operations in a country that also has a need.
And Sarah, you didn't go to business school, you didn't run a business before this. How did you create something like this? What were some of the learnings during this journey that you look at now and you realize, God, I've come such a long distance because of, these learnings or insights?
I think the number one, as cliche as it is failing, trialing, testing. I wasn't afraid. I didn't walk thinking, what if? I just went very much, I've got no experience, but I'm going to give it a go. And I gave it a go enough times that eventually one thing worked. And then, then that developed. I think the second part is I surrounded myself with really good people, and not necessarily, I've never compared Sparkle to another charity. I compare Sparkle to a business. So putting myself with business professionals, it's all transferable skills. So I really honestly believe that the people that have been around me have enabled me to grow in the way we have by giving advice that is now stayed with me and has helped develop our model. And then I think the final point, truthfully, was sort of looking at Sparkle from an outsider's perspective. I think one of the big things with the charity sector is that there's this whole thing, and I'm not afraid to speak about it, the white privilege, people come from, this is their background, this is what they need to do, and we know what's best. I've never known what's best. I'm not Malawian. I'm just here to help and be a resource. And I think I understood that very early on, and that's been driven then by the community and my ability to say no, because we've had people that wanted to partner with us over the last 10 years that I've had to say no to. We could be a multi-million-dollar charity by now, but they didn't align with our values. So we stuck with what we believed would be right. And here we are today.
And I think people, including myself, and I know from, the vast majority of our network, when you spoke at our Q4 session, they connect with you, they resonate with your story. And, when I think back to our event, it was a private event, but the amount of people that came to us saying, how do we connect with Sarah? How do we connect with Sparkle? How can we help? So I think that's an important part of the success of it as well.
Yeah, I think for us, registering here in the UAE, our big thing was for 5 years, I've listened to people say we want an opportunity to be able to make a difference here in Dubai. We know how fortunate we are. We've all come from different walks of life, but we want to be able to give back. So for me, it was about answering to those requests and creating a movement. That is very much what we're now trying to do. Sparkle's just a name. There's people around the world who want to make a difference, and we're giving them the opportunity to do so. We're not a huge charity. We've got a face, it's an identity. We can connect people with real people on the ground. And we want to change people's perception that making a big impact is the only way to help. And it's got to be a big, large offering or a big amount of money or something really significant, when actually there's things within sort of 2 or 3 seconds that you can make a real small tangible difference. And it doesn't matter what age you are, what background, what financial background you've come from, everyone has the ability to do it. So I say we're building an army here in the UAE of change makers. And do I believe honestly that we can make a significant impact that will change the world? 100% yes. And I'm just excited to see what we can do.
And I see that from our members and other big corporates, government related entities, their business owners. What areas do you think that would be of interest to them in terms of what a partnership could look like?
I think obviously from employee engagement, staff retention, it's proven model now. You just have to look around at companies, millennials, they're asking their companies for more. They want to know that their company cares. And that's what Sparkle provides. We've created a bespoke CSR initiative now that's tailored towards companies and their values, and it's mutually beneficial. And I think that's what's so important. I think a lot of corporates, organizations feel that giving to charity is one way, but actually there's so many benefits that they can get, their employees can get, and also obviously the beneficiaries on the ground. So I think it's just taking that initial step to inquire, and almost, we've had, I think I've got 150 people that have expressed an interest in wanting to partner with us within a week of us launching here in the region. And it's just taking that step and going, okay, we do want to make a difference, and here I come along with the how. And once people are engaged, there's no looking back.
And I think increasingly, I know this from the companies we deal with, but also the individuals, people are looking for more purpose. At a company level, everything is about purpose. Yes, of course, we have to make a profit to exist, but beyond that profit, what is our purpose? How can we make some kind of contribution? So there's probably no better person to ask about how do you find your purpose from a personal point of view than you, right? Because when I look at you, and I've had the privilege to become friends with you, that when the world that you live in is basically the essence of purpose. So how do you find your purpose for the rest of the world that are perhaps in the rat race?
I'd be a billionaire by now if I could tell you the exact ingredients of what that is.
But you don't want to be a billionaire.
No, but I could change thousands more lives if that was the case. But to be honest with you, I think I was having this conversation. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, and it was my chapter today, so it's quite fitting. I think it's really difficult. I think people perceive that you should wake up one morning and have this light bulb moment that I found it, and your purpose is something that just suddenly comes, and if you go looking for it, it will one day appear. I don't necessarily.
But you don't help that narrative, right?
Because you're like that narrative.
You're like the movie. When the movie is made of you, this is what I always say to you. When the movie is made of you, it will be one of those movies about a Hollywood movie of this person finding their purpose in every sense. But what you're saying is, well, most people. My story isn't most people, right?
Yes, and I have to be honest. I mean, I hope that no one has to go through what I went through for me to discover that this is what I want to do, because I ended up feeling indebted to the country and then realizing that actually giving back was the most rewarding thing in the world. But we often know the things in life that drive us forward. And I always ask every job interview I've ever given to people is, what makes you get out of bed in the morning? And it's often, if you dig deep enough into that question, there's a why. And it's not the normal, I've got to go to work, there's a reason. And then the second question that follows with that is, what legacy do you want to leave behind in this world? And if you can answer both of those questions, there'll be something that will naturally sync both of those things together. And if you dig deep enough within that, will be the what this is all about. And I think people often know it, but are too almost afraid to admit it, because actually it means change. And sometimes following your purpose doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead, people, all the brain takes over of, well, if I follow this, I won't get the money, I couldn't live in the house I live in.
I have the mortgage to pay, kids to school, etc. Yeah.
And as you develop them through life, all of these sort of layers go on top of that initial dream or that vision that you once had. And then also it becomes a distant memory. But everyone's got something within them. And it's just about, for me, lighting it up and actually taking that leap of faith and going, I'm going to do it. And it's not necessarily I'm recommending everyone to go and quit their job and go and follow the purpose. But it's just trying to find a way that you can put that into your life in some way, and then leaving it to develop.
Well, that's good, because I'd have no clients left. So that's good if they all quit their jobs. But seriously, though, in terms of the meaning aspect of, okay, that's the purpose. As you eloquently articulated there, okay, perhaps this movie interpretation of finding your purpose isn't really the way to look at it. But what advice would you give to people just trying to find a bit more meaning?
To look outside of your everyday life, to kind of remove what you see as the mundane tasks of your day to day, and actually there'll be things that are happening just around you, whether it's, they said this in COVID, our senses were enlightened because we ended up being stuck inside. And then when we went outside for the first time, we smelled things, we saw things that we'd not appreciated prior. And that's the same analogy that I'd use for your purpose. We get so stuck in this rat race, as you said, that actually the things are right on our doorstep, especially here within the UAE and across the Middle East, that there's that inkling and that purpose that is there. If people are looking for it, it's actually usually within their day-to-day already, but they've just not opened their eyes to it. And I'd throw yourself at different opportunities. I mean, the natural one, come and get involved with Sparkle. We've got heaps of volunteers. So we have loads of different projects, and for people that have got spare time, come and get involved in a project that maybe is something that you've been passionate about, and see if that kind of connects with you, and see if something develops from that. There are opportunities out there that you can, take that almost leap of faith without being afraid of, and see what happens and see where it goes. I think we're all too very quick at saying, no, there's no opportunities, there's no nothing. But, I hate to bring this into it, but majority of people in the UAE especially have got maids, gardeners, drivers. You're sitting next to someone every single day that's got a story, that's got a different background, a different life that you've had, that you could speak and listen to them, and that could reignite something within you, that actually there's a purpose for you out there. And that's what I found most, is that it starts at home and opening your eyes.
And do you think, in a way, because what you described there in a way is a heightened sense of awareness to your surroundings, right? And the circumstances that you live every day, rather than just taking things for granted and kind of blazing through the day, but being more aware. Do you feel in any way that that's why, another reason, in addition to the contribution you make there, but another reason for your connection to Africa? When you're there, do you feel more alive and more connected, and perhaps to a simpler way of life than the rat race that we often describe?
100%. I mean, people say that once you've been to Africa, it leaves something in your heart, and I still stand by that. That's the case, whether it's from the sunsets to the people. Malawi is known as the warm heart of Africa. It's in the top 5 poorest countries in the world, yet everyone's happy. There's a joy that I can't explain. People are sat with nothing, but yet they're so happy. And for me, there's nothing better than being on the ground, than being with the kids. I've known, I was legal guardian at 21 to 115 children that are now going into secondary school. So for me, I'm surrounded by my why when I'm there on the ground, but everyone can't jump on a plane and go to a different country to get that sense of why. So that's why I'm saying you've got to look above and beyond your current circumstances to find it. It's not always staring you straight in the face, but if there is a will, and I know it's cliche, there is a way, because you can find that sense of peace and that connection with things if you actually open yourself up to it. And a lot of the times we just shut ourselves off because we're in our day-to-day, and there's none of that. But equally, Dubai serves also a great purpose for me. Coming and speaking, Trevor, at the event, for me, that also gives me this sense of motivation and passion, because I sit amongst a room of people that have the other decision makers that can actually go, you know what, Sarah, we believe in you, we believe in Sparkle, we want to make a difference, let's join forces and let's do something. And we're 14,000 lives that we've impacted now, and that was me, very much a lot of it alone, and just people hearing my story. We've just launched in the UAE. I've sat in front of 200 CEOs who've got the capabilities for us to change GDPs of countries, and I don't say that kind of by just on a whim. I genuinely think something can be done significant, and it could all come back to people in the UAE, what we've been able to create.
And I have to say, it was very heartening for me as well, seeing the appetite, because this was something I mentioned to you after COVID, when we went back to our physical events, and the team and I were talking about, okay, our members pay us a membership fee for giving them a certain type of information. But also, when I connect with these people, they're interested in how they solve problems. They're interested in how they can contribute. They're interested beyond just their day-to-day being a CEO, right? They tend to have a very kind of growth mindset. And if they see a problem, they tend to be the type of individual that wants to contribute or try solve it in some way that they they can. So we slowly started to bring in small steps these types of initiatives like yours and shine a spotlight on them to see what the response would be in terms of our members contributing. And as I say, to see the appetite from the members and how they went on to support you in different initiatives was really great. So for you, it must give you a whole nother set of purpose. But listen, I just have time for one last question. You've been very gracious with your time. So you've had this incredible journey. You're still very young. You've had this incredible journey that will be turned into a book, and I'm convinced will be turned into a movie. During all this time, when you look back over that period, is there any piece of advice or words of wisdom that you have sought out and has helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I think there's definitely three things that I've learned along the way. One, probably resilience. I know it's the key word that everyone throws around, but I've bounced back not only from death, but from every challenge that's been thrown at me possible. So many people, I started in Malawi. I wasn't allowed to sit in the same room as the men. I was the only woman, and they told me to eat outside and not even come to the table. We say now about women round the table. I wasn't allowed in the room. So the challenges that have come that way have just been, and there's just been that relentless of, I've got to keep pushing back. I've got to keep bouncing back. I've got to do this. That sense of challenge with myself was definitely there. The other one is definitely would have to be the people that I've surrounded myself with. And I mentioned this earlier, but I look back way back when I was at school. I think being kind is really underrated. People that I sat next to in school that I never necessarily spoke to have been some of my biggest supporters now today. And that is purely because I think I wasn't offensive at school. I was when I went to university. They've heard the story and now want to get involved. So you just never know when you sat in a taxi talking to the taxi driver, whether you're walking in the supermarket. Some of the connections that I've made through people that have led me to where Sparkle's got to today have been those random interactions. So that would be the second one. And then the final one would be not caring what people think.
That's a tough one.
It's hard, but I sit here, 31 years of age, most people my age, married, children, living in a house somewhere in the world. I don't know where I'm going to be next month. I'm very much doing this journey sort of by myself with my team around me. Everyone tries to put me into a box, even my own parents, of where they think I should be. And I've learned that everyone's on their own journey and their own path. And I take advice and I listen to advice and utilize it when required. But equally, I'm not afraid to be breaking the stereotype of what I should be doing to pursue this vision that I've got for what I want to create. And I think that would be my biggest recommendation to other people. If I'd known now what I did, all those years I spent going back and forth, should I, shouldn't I? What about that? What about this? Just go for it.
Sometimes that comes with a little bit of, you're very young, but it comes with a little bit of maturity. The wisdom comes where you realize you have to make these decisions for yourself. But Sarah, as always, fascinating to listen to your story. Thanks so much for sharing. And thanks for being part of our network, because I think you add a huge amount of value, because you give all of us an opportunity to contribute in the small way that we can. And when we have such an influential network, these are people that can make a difference, right? When you're the person making decisions and you speak to the right person, it actually ends up in some action. So it's great having you a part of the network.
Oh, thanks so much, Trevor. I really appreciate it. And to all the members that have got in touch and reached out. It's really exciting opportunity. And as I said, extremely excited to see what we can do here in the region.
Well, let's continue to shine a light on Sparkle through Boardroom. Sarah, thanks so much. And I'll see you soon anyway.
Thank you.